jump in and make this as interactive as possible. So Zach, I'll turn it back over to you for anything else you want before we kick off.
No, dude. Hey, I just wanted to say thanks for coming in here and helping out these vets and like that. I mean, I know not everybody's like a veteran, but like it's cool as shit to have you, man. Your experience, like Dr. Casey has probably been out of throughout the years, I've probably hired I don't know, almost 60 instructors that come back and facilitate. And, I try to find the cream of the crop to come back, right? Like, training is not free, right? Good training is not free. Like, that's just period. But thinking about it from an instructor standpoint, coming and leading. So I'm just excited that you guys get to uh learn about this stuff. But the coolest thing is, Dr. Casey, like pick his brain. Pick
Yeah.
his brain, ask him questions. This course is not just like, hey, I'm gonna sit through, check the box. Like if you do that, dude, you're not gonna make a hundred and something $1,000 a year. That's just like we're not check the boxes here. We're here to guide you guys in the right career. We're gonna talk about careers. You guys will have your student file. Let me go ahead and share that with you. Some of you weren't able to open up the student file. That's okay. We're gonna put it in the link right now. Um,
And I'll mention too, Zach, I put a couple of links in earlier to cases that we will use, and I'll draw your attention during the class when we want to take a look at those. One will take about 3 minutes to read, another will take about seven, and I'll let you know when, but those are the links. I just wanted to get them in there so I didn't have to swap screens too much. And we'll
yeah,
be tracing a case study throughout the class tonight, so we're going to tie it into hands-on stuff, and you get some experience in a simulated audit environment with a healthcare organization.
yeah. So, Dr. Casey, are you okay? Are you okay if I steal the screen real fast, broski?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So, hold on. I got a bunch of student information. Give me a second. So this zip file, I want you guys to download this. Don't just keep it in your download box. Extract it, put it in your desktop. I would say build a folder that says Star Global College and put this access in, right? I'm going to share the screen, so I want to just kind of walk you through which one are you guys? You guys see my screen, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to zoom in. So you guys will get the PDF version of class, right? There's no instructor notes in there, but the PD version of the course. This book right here, this is the older version. I forgot to put the price on it, but you guys will get this book for free. So you'll get a link after you take your exam, and it'll say, "Hey, go here to purchase your facilitator guide." That is not required. Everybody understand that? Like you don't have to
Yeah.
purchase the book. I mean, if you can, like you want to send money my way, I'm absolutely sure. I'm glad. But I don't make any money on this book. This book is like I think I profit like $3. And it's ridiculous. But once you do publications and everything, but the way I'm doing it is I'm going to give you the instructor facilitator guide so you guys don't have to pay for that. But I do want you guys to see that as a reference because as you guys teach this, you're teaching out of this file. You guys understand? Like you're getting your facilitator kit right here. And I'll mail the books to you guys. Now, to be able to certify people in ISO standards, you have to be certified yourself as a lead auditor trader. So that's what the purpose of tonight's class is. Dive you in, understand case studies, dive you into understanding it. I have this is the book, the student book. You guys can see that. Not too far off from what the PowerPoints are. It might be a little bit different. Dr. Casey has a little bit of stuff, but for the most part, this course follows the book. You guys also will get like an auditor matrix. This is like a rough draft for you. You can make this what you want, but I've given you examples of what we're auditing, what's in the book, how do you cover it, what do you talk about, what are some key points for next audit. So Dr. Casey will go into there a little bit more. I just want to introduce you to the zip file. You have an internal audit plan. So this is where we audit an organization. And this is like a template for you to use no matter what organization you go to. Obviously, like quality management systems, right? That's the focus of this ISO standard. But you'll be able to go in and go through a checklist and go through it. Um, I have some auditor checklist notes, and I have like the standard summary, a little bit of a rough draft of what we're looking for, what the clauses go through. So tonight I am so like I can't tell you how excited I am for you guys. Being able to do this program and not having to pay thousands of dollars to get and become a lead auditor in ISO 9001 um, is it's an incredible opportunity. And those of you that are not familiar with this, when you start diving into organizations, and especially if you start doing consulting, that is where the money is, like for you guys to like really think about. As a consultant, when I first got certified in ISO as a lead auditor, my first year, I cleared over $200,000, like within the first 8 months, actually. So the I'm trying to share this not as like a brag, like, oh, look at me, but I want you to see this from your side and your perspective of the value you guys are going to get tonight. Do I got any questions before I turn it back over to Dr. Casey about the student file? The anything that we're going to talk about, Dr. Casey is going to go into, but I'm about to turn it over to him for the rest of the evening. Uh,
Hey, hey Zach, it's
hey,
Tom.
hey,
Um,
Tom.
hey man, just real quick, 30 seconds or less. Regarding the curriculum we're currently doing right now, what week does this fall into? Is it close to the end of the program for the associate's degree?
This is not the same program at all.
Copy.
This is a completely different thing. There
Okay. I
will
didn't.
there will be a recording that will be up on our page for you guys. However, well, I don't want to say however, but this program is designed to make you a lead auditor. So, going into organizations, guiding continuous improvement methodologies, that's what I've built my career off of. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Casey. You guys have a wonderful class. I just want to say thank you guys so much for being here, being a part of this. There's a lot more programs that our organization offers, and overall our goal is to get you guys the knowledge, get you certified, and get you out in the workforce. Right? I could care less if you're doing this for promotion in the military. I'm not saying I don't love the military, but the military is not paying you over 100K a year. We're going to guide you into those careers and talk about what you can do with this certification tonight. It's very, very powerful. Hey, Tom, can I make you a co-host just in case Casey doesn't see students in the waiting room and stuff?
Yeah, that's fine. I can do that.
Okay.
Zach, relevant question then. Is there a cutoff point where we're admitting students like an hour into the actual lesson that we're going to have an issue? I mean,
The problem is like if a student gets kicked out, right?
correct, but if we're looking at new students coming in trying to like last minute type thing,
I don't typically see that, so you're okay there. Um,
okay,
yeah.
no problem.
And just so you guys know, Mr. Brandt is a facilitator and co-director for our associate degree program, and he's got a wealth of knowledge too. You're in project management, right, Tom? That's what your career is?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I'm working on my PMP at the moment. Finished my MBA just recently with honors. So yes.
Good, good, you guys. So you guys enjoy the class tonight. Make sure when you guys register for the exam, the instructor is going to tell you, make sure you put the correct address because this book is not going to go a second time to you. It's going to be one shot for you guys. Okay. So you guys have a great class. I appreciate you guys being here, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next program. You guys, Dr. Casey, you carry out the plan of the day, sir.
Fantastic. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I'm excited to talk to you about quality. I'm excited to talk to you about ISO 9001. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history, and then we're going to go into a case study in healthcare so we can see how to apply some of these principles. And before I bog you down into a slideshow, I wanted just to get your brain going a little bit in this area. So there's some terms that I'm going to go over. I'm just going to mention them, let them float out there so that you can kind of let them sink in for a second in your mind. Um, when we talk about quality, what we're ultimately trying to describe is value delivery, right? We want value delivery to our customers or our stakeholders who are invested. And as you'll see in the public and nonprofit sectors, things are a little bit different because people don't have a choice about whether to invest in these services. They're compelled to often in the form of taxation, right? So that's one difference that you might see in looking at stakeholder alignment. But generally speaking, you're going to see things that carry over across industries and across sectors because quality matters, right? When you first think about quality, what comes to mind for you?
How well things are done.
Okay. So we're talking about how well things are done. In other words, how careful are we with the process of producing a good or
Good service.
service?
Yes.
There you go.
If it's
I'm
down to
sorry.
code,
Less than 2% defect rate.
There you go. So we're looking to keep it below Six Sigma. Lynn, you have your
I was
hand
gonna
up.
say, yeah, I was gonna say dependable
Absolutely.
and reliable.
Reliable. Okay. So we want quality in the production process and we want quality for the end user, right? Because we can have something that works really well, but if it's not recognized as a quality product or service, it doesn't do us much good. So we're going to talk about value streams, we're going to talk about value delivery, and more importantly, a relatively new concept in the area of quality management is the idea of value recognition. And that is making people aware that they are receiving services that are important. And in the public sector and the nonprofit sector, this is especially apparent if you look at things like government social programs. Would you believe that over a quarter of recipients of food stamps would say, I have never used a government social program? The number goes higher for people that have received, say, government housing or for people who have used student loans. A lot of people aren't aware that these are government social programs. They don't recognize the value that they are creating in their lives, and so they might vote against their self-interest, right? So part of our job is not just to deliver value, but to have it recognized. And how we recognize value is through developing quality products, through quality processes that can be replicated, that can be standardized. And Thomas, to your point, in doing so, we reduce defects. And ideally, we're going to reduce defects to a minimum amount. We also look for waste. And what a lot of people get wrong about this area of quality management and lean in general and lean Six Sigma, a lot of times they look at it as ultimately being geared toward eliminating waste. And that's not wrong per se, but waste reduction is really just an externality, just a benefit of improving the quality with which you're delivering your services, right? The quality in your value stream, getting rid of impediments in your value stream, getting rid of trouble with handoffs, getting rid of teams being misaligned because they're not communicating effectively. In other words, we're not just talking about a process and a set of steps, we're talking about leadership. We're talking about team alignment. We're talking about being aware that our stakeholders might have different visions and might need different interpretations or different presentations of quality, right? So if I'm talking about a windmill project that I'm bringing to my town, my environmentally oriented stakeholders are going to want to hear about the environmental benefits. Those who are more interested in economic incubation are going to base their assessment of quality on economic incubation factors, right? How much growth in terms of jobs, how much growth in terms of taxation that it brings to the local economy. So everybody's right. And the funny thing about everybody being right is that it opens up a little bit of a window. We talk about quality being a methodology, and we'll go through that detailed methodology tonight. But at the end of the day, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
Quality is going to be reflected by the end user, right? And some people, right, to quote a book some of us are familiar with, some people might not recognize pearls when they are cast before them, right? And so getting people on board, not just with understanding the quality in the production process, but ultimately how it loops in. And that leads us to the most important word that you will hear all night. And that word is system. So we're not talking about a quality management check. We're not talking about a quality management exercise. We're talking about a quality management system. And when we're talking about a system, we're talking about something that is affected by and affects its environment, right? So everything that I tell you about quality is contingent on you knowing that the real right answer in any circumstance is it depends, right? You're going to still have to use your own judgment to tailor solutions to different organizational contexts, and that's okay. That's the beauty of ISO standards is that they give us a platform of uniformity while also allowing for contextual tailoring. And I think that's really cool. You get the best of both worlds. Another thing that you're going to hear until your ears might start to bleed tonight, we're going to talk a lot about the plan, do, check, act cycle, or as I call it, the plan, do, study, act cycle. And the idea here is we are managing quality, not just on the onset with planning it into our operations. We're also performing it and keeping track of metrics to indicate our performance. And then we're able to check those to see how they line with our objectives, with our goals. And then we can act in a way that will bring about reform, bring about higher quality products and services. So it's not a one directional process. It's a set of feedback loops, ultimately looping back to planning, right? We're collecting evaluation information. The reason we're doing this quality stuff isn't just to comply with the law, it isn't just to mitigate risk. It's to take an opportunity to assess what our mission is in relation to quality, right? Because what we define as quality is going to be dependent a lot of times on what our mission actually is. We're also going to talk a little bit about strategy here and using audits, especially as a strategy to identify opportunities for proactive value delivery. So when we think about audits, a lot of times what we think about is retroactive compliance, orientation, bureaucracy, right? I want you to challenge your thoughts about audits and instead think of them as an opportunity to identify ways to deliver more value to your organization. Now, when Zach's talking about going in and being a consultant, it's one thing to say, hey, you're not conforming to these expectations from the ISO. It's quite another thing to say, and here's how you could deliver value by bringing more conformity into your organization, right? So compliance isn't something that's an afterthought. It isn't something that we do so we can check a box. Compliance, especially with quality, is how we build a reputation, how we get repeat customers, how we build a legacy, right? We're going to talk about different research approaches when it comes to quality, quantitative versus qualitative, and some of the trade-offs associated with that. What I would leave you with in that regard, just from a general 30,000 feet in the air overview, there is not one best methodology, just like there isn't one right answer. A lot of times, the best approach is to triangulate or combine methodology. So you get the breadth and external validity and statistical power of a large sample through surveys, while also being able to get a little more depth of understanding about specific phenomena through interviews, through focus groups and town halls and other kind of qualitative dimensions or approaches. And then we'll talk about teams, right? Because quality doesn't take place in isolation. Remember, we're talking about a system, and so we're saying that each of us plays a role in fostering quality and identifying ways to improve it. This isn't just something for C-suite executives. It isn't something for audit nerds with glasses like mine and big keyboards, right? It's all of us, right? Because value matters to all of us. Quality matters to all of us because we want to have repeat business, right? So we're looking beyond a single product or service, and we're saying, how can we implement a set of standards that will ensure we're able to satisfy expectations to scale so that we can grow while continuing to deliver that value? Right? So with that in mind, let's dive into the case study. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction to the organization and then get into some more specifics about the case as we progress. So we're going to call it Prairie Care. And if you got a grandparent or a mother-in-law or somebody that's in a care facility, right? It might be the case that they have some sort of hip dysplasia or they might have some cognitive trouble. So they're in a place where they get assisted living care. And in this particular case, we're dealing with aging veterans. So we're dealing with an aging veteran population that's seeking these services. What are the problems that we're seeing here? Okay, and you may just want to take some notes, jot down some ideas. We'll revisit these, so don't feel like you have to break your wrist. But the problems that we're seeing that we're going to address tonight, inconsistent documentation. In other words, we don't have the same paperwork, the same forms, the same procedures. We're dealing with those forms, right? Why can that cause a headache? Well, it makes it difficult for us to understand when we're experiencing the same issue or when it's different, right? So standardizing our forms and templates enables us to collectively pool those and aggregate them and conduct statistical analyses. It also helps us to identify patterns and themes, right? Delays. And delays can come at any point in your value stream, but most often delays are associated with two areas, and these are tied directly to quality. The first is handoffs, right? Anytime the production process moves from one phase to another, we are assuming a lot of times that the people taking over the work have the information that they need, right? We know what they say about assumptions, and so we have to be careful, and we have to give clear instructions of where we're at, what we expect, and provide a little bit more context than might be our natural inclination. Why? So that we can avoid botched handoffs, so that we can avoid rework, which is the another source of quality impediment, right? When we end up with rework, it means we don't have time to focus on producing new quality materials because we're fixing defects in ones we've already produced, right? So the first question, just in general, again, before we get into the weeds, the first question, what does quality mean to you? And I want you just to think about that. You don't need to respond or write anything down, but just think about it. What does that mean to you as a consumer? If you go to the store and you expect quality, and for some of us, we might not be able to describe it. We might not have the words just yet, but we know it when we see it, don't we? We know when we're buying something that's a piece of junk. And I'll challenge you here. You might say, how is that true? Well, would you buy your 25th wedding anniversary gift at the Dollar Tree? And notice here that's a very efficient purchase. But we're not talking about quality there, are we? You might not have a 26th wedding anniversary if you were to do that, right? What does that tell us? It tells us that quality is about effectiveness. And a lot of times in management, we hear about efficiency, especially procedural efficiency. How much bang can we get for our buck? How much output can we get for the resources that we're investing, right? There are two other E's that we discuss. There's economy, and that's a really simple question. Do we have the money? And a lot of times quality management is tied to lean allocation. If we look at the performance metrics of various programs, we're going to know where to put more of an investment over the long haul and even in the short term, right? So we want quality not just to inform our processes and reduce our defects. We want quality to be the basis of organization strategy. And again, quality is something that can be subjective, but the ISO gives us common language and common processes by which we can understand what quality means. And I'll give you just a few examples here, going back to economy, effectiveness, efficiency, and finally equity, right? Fairness or justice, which is the consideration we see more frequently in the public sector. So when it comes to those four E's, and we'll get to them in a little bit more detail and juxtapose them, the way to understand them from my point of view, the easiest way to think about them is going to the grocery store, right? So if you have a place you like to shop, I like to go to Aldi, even though Aldi is not the Aldi it used to be in terms of bang for your buck, right? You remember you used to be able to go to Aldi and you could get 2 weeks worth of groceries for like $30, right? Not quite that way anymore, but still value oriented purchase. So I go into Aldi, and my very first question before I pick up anything to buy is what? What do I have to ask?
What's the cost?
There you go. What's the cost? And what that means really to me is, do I have the money to cover that cost, right? So I'm asking myself, do I have the money or am I quick enough to steal it and run, right? And hopefully we're going to pay for it. So the first question we have to ask is about economy. Do we have the money for this program, right? Do we have the money for this product development? The next question we're going to ask at the grocery store is, all right, I've got the money. How can I get the most bang for my buck? And we talked about that already as efficiency, right? So how can I stretch my dollar and get, say, a more substantial quantity of food for a lower price per volume? So we might buy a larger container, or we might buy the value size of laundry detergent or eggs or what have you. Well, I guess not eggs because right now you got to get like a second mortgage to buy a carton of eggs. But generally speaking, we go in with the question, do we have the money? How can we spend it most efficiently? And now notice that we haven't talked at all about quality. We haven't talked about effectiveness. Why is that important? Well, in the context of Aldi, if we stop just at efficiency and economy, then what we realize is if I have finite resources, I'm going to make the most efficient purchase. And that might be enough ramen noodles to kill God, right? If we're just focusing on efficiency, though, what we might notice is just eating ramen noodles gives us scurvy and we don't last very long, right? Now, I have some college students that I teach that would argue with me because they believe wholeheartedly you can survive on ramen and booze, and maybe they're able to. I'm too old for that. I don't know about you guys. But generally speaking, we want some nutrition. We want some vitamins, right? We don't want our hair and skin to fall out. We don't want scurvy. We don't want to have our organs shut down, right? And we don't want to eat styrofoam. That's a good point. Ramen is not the most flavorful meal that you could get. So our question might go beyond efficiency. It might go beyond how can we cheaply produce things, and instead we might begin to ask, how can we produce an effective good or service? One that is durable, one that is reliable. Remember, I asked you to think about the military survives on rippets and nicotine. Well, you might be onto something there. So creature comforts might not necessarily be what you're used to. But when we think about quality, you remember I asked you to think about the word quality, and I'm guessing at some point you had reliability come to mind, dependability, right? We think about a quality vehicle as being one that we can go and put the key in and crank, right? Stuff that works. We want it to be professional, and we want it to be useful in the sense of the time that we're living in. None of us are going to buy the highest quality 8-track player in the world right now, unless you live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where last I heard they had brought Walkmans back, and they were walking around with battery-powered cassette Walkmans like we used to have. So maybe that's a thing. So how are we going to align these 4 E's tonight? Because notice there's some tension, right? We want efficiency because we want to get the most bang for our buck, but we want to do that in a way that doesn't sacrifice quality. And that's what the QMS is all about. How can we create standards and uniform production procedures that will ensure quality throughout scaling? So when we talk about a QMS, I'll give you a really brief definition of it. It's a set of coordinated activities to direct and control an organization with regard to quality. In other words, we're talking about an organization-wide plan and set of procedures. And often you'll see this embedded in the organization standard operating procedures manual, right? We also are going to talk a little bit about standardization because remember, that's how we're trying to marry efficiency and effectiveness. So with standardization, we're talking about establishing consistency. For those of you with a Six Sigma background, Six Sigma defect reduction comes to mind here. We want consistency in our output so that we can reduce defects, which means we're reducing rework and enhancing customer satisfaction. Okay. Now, when we think about ISO 9001, where people get trapped sometimes, especially organizations, is they say, I have met compliance with this ISO, ergo, I am excellent. Disabuse yourselves of that notion. Compliance is the bare minimum here, right? ISO 9001 sets the minimum framework. What we ought to see it is more of a launch pad for organization strategy discussions, for enhanced risk management, for value delivery, for stakeholder alignment. There are lots of applications, right, that we ought to think beyond. It's not something that we do once a year. It's not something that we do to prepare for an audit or an inspection. It's something that we do so that we can align the vision of the organization with the everyday activities occurring within that organization, right? Some core principles, and these are clauses from the ISO that we're going to go over in the presentation. I just want to prep you. So we're going to talk about the context of the organization. And as I mentioned, the case we'll be using is a nonprofit organization. That context is going to color and probably affect some of the intervention strategy, some of the processes, some of the people with whom we're interacting, right? That doesn't mean that it's useless. It's just something to be aware of. And that's not something that you'll see just between sectors or just between industries. Every single organization has its own individual culture. And a lot of that is tied to quality and what quality is perceived to mean within that organization. And remember, when we're making a quality decision, we're making a trade-off. And that trade-off is coming at the expense of efficiency. So quality is going to cost more. The question is, how much are we willing to pay? Okay. Planning. So overarching strategy for the organization, support, that is what can we do at the administrative and meso levels of the organization to support the day-to-day implementation of the activities that are going to bring about quality, right? Operation, and those are the day-to-day operations, the day-to-day activities. And what I want you to think about here is these are the people who are touching things. These are the people who are on the ground, on the assembly lines. These are the people who are working directly in patient care. And for them, operation might mean, hey, there are rules to follow, but it also might mean I have some professional training I can fall back on when the rules aren't clear. So one benefit to you, not just as an instructor or an audit trainer or a specialist in this area, is this framework gives you something to fall back on, right? In any organization, quality is going to be important. So the idea is, you know that you're looking for a boat. Now you've got to find the specific type of boat. Is it a canoe? Is it a pontoon? Is it a speedboat? But what kind of boat are you working on is going to determine the tools you need. But generally speaking, you know that you're going to work on a boat in a certain way that you wouldn't work on, say, a car or a helicopter or a spaceship, right? So let's start out with just a little story here to get our blood flowing. And then we'll get into the first part of our PowerPoint. So a little story here. Remember, we're talking about Prairie Care. It's a veterans aging home for assistive care. And in this setting, we have two nurses.
I want show. Okay, cafe matcha.
I'm sorry, sir. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry about that. I think we just had somebody stepping over themselves on mic there. So our case is prairie home. We're talking about veterans in an aged care facility. And we have two nurses who are documenting differently. What does that cause on the back end? Well, as a result of the differences in documentation, there are delays with billing, which means the payment through Medicare, Medicaid, and other insurance and other sources is delayed. So this creates a backlog, it creates a log jam, and what it does also in terms of quality is it enhances our batch size, right? Our work in progress. We have so much going on that it becomes more difficult to focus on one single area of operations or one single bill, right? So what we want to think about here is what we can do to zoom out of having these particular instances of misalignment so that we can generate a quality focus throughout. Okay. So we see these billing delays, and what often happens in any organization, public, private, or nonprofit, if you're looking to enhance quality, the very first thing that you want to look at is your batch size. How much work in progress is going on? How much are people trying to do? Because if you bite off too much, you're not going to be able to chew it. Ellie Goldratt tells us in The Choice, the easiest way to bring a system into line is to reduce batch size. So we're dealing here with batch size increasing because we have these delays. So the spillover effects are affecting the value stream of the organization. How would we address it? Well, as you'll see later tonight, we would address it by looking first at Clause 8, the operational clause, Clause 7, the support clause, and see why there isn't a standardized form and training to deal with that form that would then accelerate value creation. Right? So with that in mind, a little bit about the roots here, and the first link that I sent was to an article about dimming. And I'm going to go ahead and share this article and hit the high points with you. Because when we talk about quality, the reason that we often focus on lean as being associated with quality has everything to do with W. Edwards Deming. So you might remember in Japan, at the end of World War II, we were seeing a rebuild. Japan had just lost the war. There was a lot of national pride that was lost along with that. And there was the devastating consequences of two atomic bombs that had been dropped on uh, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So W. Edwards Deming comes in knowing that resources are limited and knowing that waste reduction, among other approaches to developing quality, is going to be one of the ways that we can deal with those scarce resources. Now, we're not in post-World War II Japan, but we all, especially right now, feel the constraints associated with those scarce resources. And so if we look at a fear that we might have, what we might understand eventually is that quality management, because it gives us something to rely on, helps to alleviate or ameliorate change when it comes to new initiatives in the organization. So it's not just about maintaining the status quo and managing what we already have. Quality management is one basis for planning organizational expansion, new programs, new ideas. Right? So how did we overcome this in Japan? Take a couple of looks. First off, Deming says there are 14 points that we ought to consider. And he says we ought to create in every organization a total quality management system. Okay? So he says we need constancy of purpose, continuous learning, and elimination of fear. So having quality management systems is a way that we can, again, have something to fall back on to ensure that we're creating value, even if it's a scary time or a time of limited resources. Okay. So how are we reframing fear? We're saying fear can be measured. So one thing that you ought to keep in mind with the PDCA is the whole purpose of it is to generate data for measurement to understand how we can continuously improve. So we never get to quality and say, hey, we arrived. Quality is an ongoing continuous improvement effort in the organization. And to Deming, this was a moral issue as much as it was about an organizational philosophy. All about taking pride in the work that we're doing. And what we see today, well, things are not the same as they were in Japan, but goodness, we have a lot to be worried about. We have job insecurity, we have digital surveillance, algorithmic decision making, social pressure, right? Tariffs, all kinds of stuff that are affecting us. And if we know that we're operating in a system, what we have to realize is fixing or controlling what we're able to and letting everything else be in the wind. Well, that's how we succeed, right? You're never going to control something that's outside of your wheelhouse or your hula hoop. So the PDCA and QMS approach limits us in a good way. It limits us to our particular organization with ability to tailor contextually to the setting. Okay. Deming warns us that management by fear invites disaster. And you'll see throughout this course, risk management is part of quality management. But again, with risk, we ought to consider that risk isn't just the risk that bad things could happen. It also includes the possibility of the opportunity for good things happening. Right? And then finally, there are some applications in this area for personal growth, right? Confronting your own fear, right? Even in times of great despair, and enhancing the quality, because ultimately quality begins with you. So having said that, here are our objectives. You're going to understand requirements and clauses. And again, this is going to be a 30,000 foot overview with specific case applications so that you get a little bit of both, a little bit of both ends, and hopefully leave here a little bit more comfortable about not just the overall strategy and philosophy, but also leave here with some hands-on tools. And that's especially true if you take advantage of the free book that Zach was offering earlier, that he will mail to your house like it's the internet coming to your house in 1993 in an AOL CD. So you're going to understand requirements and clauses, auditing principles. You're going to understand how to conduct an audit. We'll walk through some examples of how you do that, how to deal with nonconformities and drive compliance. Okay. So who should attend? Well, you're already here. So when we talk about,
Casey,
yes, sir.
you're not sharing your screen. You're still
Oh,
on
my bad. There
yeah,
we go.
just double check that, like I said.
Yep. My bad. So here we are, back to where we need to be, and I'll pop back just a little bit. So quality, again, if we're going to define it operationally according to the ISO, we're going to say that quality refers to all features of a product or service required by the customer. In other words, quality means the customer has been satisfied. So the degree to which an inherent set of characteristics fulfills their requirements. And notice that this can be a difficult target to hit. And sometimes it can be like nailing jello to a tree because different stakeholders have different requirements. And quality management gives us a common language to talk about fulfilling those requirements and the trade-offs that are required to do so. Right? Because often in environments where we have scarce resources, if we spend $1 on one program, that means it is not available for another one. Right? So when we talk about quality, we're not just talking about how effective, efficient, economical, or equitable a program is. We're talking about its long-term viability, its sustainability. And what I want to impress upon you here, probably one of the bigger lessons from tonight, What we decide to put money into reflects the values of the organization. So if we're willing to invest in advancements and enhancements in quality, then that's going to be a program that we recognize as important. Right? So it's not just about compliance, it's also about positioning your program as being an important one in your organization, one that ought to be considered for funding. Right? Quality management is what an organization does to ensure that the customer's requirements are satisfied, that regulations, standards, and laws are complied with, right? Because it doesn't matter how efficient or effective your product is, if you have to do a recall or if you get sued, a lot of that profit's going to go out the window. We're looking to enhance customer satisfaction. And remember, that's not a one direction process, that is continuous. We continuously want to look at ways to improve quality based on meeting those satisfactions and requirements. And I would go beyond customer and say stakeholders, right? Including internal ones, our team members, the people that we're supervising, the people that hire us to train, right? We want to reduce error and defects, again, because that contributes to a backlog. It increases our batch size, it lowers quality. And we want to get into the spirit of continual improvement. And what you'll see with this approach is it integrates the scientific method. You're going to see the scientific method reflected in the plan, do, check, act cycle, right? From hypothesis generation to testing to evaluating the results to acting upon those, right? So we first come up with a logical, rational relationship between two variables. We then come up with a way to measure it. We do measure it, and then based on the measurements and analysis of those, we're able to discern what we can do to improve quality. Right? So higher level, this isn't scary stuff. It isn't something that should scare you off because you learn the scientific method in grade school, and that's really all we're talking about. Okay. Now, one point you'll see in this class that's a point of contention, and I flip back and forth. The PDCA act approach, Plan, Do, Check, Act. Some people refer to it as the Plan, Do, Study Act because they believe that checking simply means you're looking through and checking off, whereas studying means you're looking to use those results, analyze those, and inform future programs, right? So study has a little bit more of an active or action verb context, and it tends to be what we see with value stream management specialists when they talk about the PDCA. So if you see it as Plan, Do, Study, Act, just know that it's the same thing as Deming's PDCA. And honestly, where it comes down to is interpretation, because the original interpretation from Japan and from Japanese left some wiggle room with interpretation. Right? So what's a management system? It's the system we put in place to manage satisfying those requirements that we talked about, to comply with regulations, to meet environmental standards, right? So when we talk about management, we're talking about maintaining the organization, keeping it afloat, and making sure that it meets objectives. There's quality leadership that's involved in this ISO, but for now, we're talking about the activities that sustain the organization, right? So we can think about management as keeping our heads above water, keeping things operating, keeping the lights on. So we want management. It's integral, but we also want leadership, and we'll talk about the differences a little bit later. To be efficient and effective, the organization can manage things by systemizing activities. So we're talking here about standard work. Why do we want standard work? Well, first off, so that we can have common expectations. So if I go and order a Big Mac, no matter where I'm at, I'm going to get a pretty close approximation of the same product, right? We also want standardization so that we can buy equipment, right, that has a standard size or a standard unit. So we don't have to change out equipment and other features or components of that equipment, right? And then probably the best thing about a management system is it introduces two very important and complementary dynamics into the organization. So the first is responsibility. So a quality management system gives us the language to talk about who is responsible. So when we hear the word responsibility, think duty, right? Your responsibility is what you're expected to perform as your duty. It also introduces accountability. Now, a lot of times we hear accountability and responsibility and we think of them as coterminous, as synonymous. They're not. Accountability is managing expectations. In other words, managing customer quality requirements in the course of fulfilling your duty. Right? How do we do that? Well, we do that by standardizing what we know creates quality. So we're integrating lessons into our organization, meaning the quality management approach is really premised on creating a learning organization, right? So this is continuous improvement contingent on a learning organization, right? What are we hoping to get out? We want improved quality, obviously. We want improved efficiency, also effectiveness, right? An improved level of motivation. In other words, when people see that the goods and services that they're producing are wanted, are desirable, a funny thing tends to happen. They take pride in where they work, right? Some of us may take pride in where we work right now because we can identify different facets of quality that we deliver, right? If we believe that we're all on the same trajectory for quality as an organization principle and part of our vision, it's going to be easier to work together. It's going to be easy to cooperate, to share information. There's going to be less territoriality, less red tape, less miscommunication and games of telephone, right? More direct person to person communication. All kinds of good things can spill out of this. We're going to focus on controlling processes, bringing them into and holding them in control so that we get consistent, reliable products. We want a greater focus on continual improvement. In other words, we don't want to achieve the bare minimum. Instead, we want to raise the bar for ourselves and our organization so that our customers' continuing expectations can be met. Because we all know, whatever sector we're in, customers always want more, right? We as consumers always want more. And then finally, we're going to see improved prospect opportunities. So people are going to be more willing to invest in you if you are able to show them that you're aligned with quality. And better market image. And remember, that goes back to value recognition. So with those caveats in place, let's take 5, stretch our legs. We'll come back and get into the meat of this first unit, or the end of this first unit, and wiggle into our case study approach. So take 5, stretch your legs, run to the bathroom, grab a snack if you need to, and I'll meet you back at 8:10 Eastern, 7:10 Central. All right. We'll just dive back in, and we may have a couple people who are taking a couple extra seconds, but we'll dive back in here. Go ahead and make sure you can see this. And we'll get into our case study in just a second. I wanted to go over a couple of more background kind of things with the ISO, just to give you a little bit of context and a little bit of description here. So when we talk about the International Organization for Standards, the first thing you might notice is the acronym doesn't match. It's because the acronym is in Swiss. Kind of like NATO has another acronym in French, right? So it's based in Switzerland. It's made up of over 100 national standards bodies, more than 20,000 standards in the portfolio, and all they are out to achieve is international consensus on what ought to be done in different facets of an organization, whether it be energy management, quality management, as is the case here, cybersecurity, AI management. So there are a vast number of ISOs. This one is foundational for a lot of them, right? A lot of ISOs are premised on the PDCA cycle. So it might be the case that you explore other audit certification training and you're able to teach those. And you come into it with a pretty firm background just from having the plan, do, check, act cycle, right? And this gives you a little bit of history on this particular ISO and how it's evolved. Its most recent iteration has been 2018. Okay. And you can look through at specific components of the ISO, right? So when you look at the annexes, you're going to see high-level structure, identical core text, and again, that's to standardize across industries. So we want consistencies, we want alignment, we want people who are working in different companies in the same industry to have the same quality standards, right? This is the scope, and as you'll notice, the scope of the ISO is pretty big. We're going to focus, we've talked a little bit about context and tailoring. We've talked a little bit about leadership. We're going to focus most of the rest of our meeting on these other facets. So plan, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. And you'll notice that fits in nicely with the plan, do, check, act cycle, right? So planning and if we separate out planning, that's plan, obviously. Support and operation is going to be our do. Our check is going to be the performance evaluation. And then the act is going to be taking action to improve things that are not conforming or areas where quality could be enhanced. Okay. How do people get to become part of the ISO? They're nominated and confirmed. What is the importance of the ISO? Why are you doing this? Why do organizations want it? Well, first off, it gives a signal of quality that is globally recognized, right? So it's the equivalent for an organization of having, say, a PMP or having a Six Sigma black belt. It also is a requirement in a lot of cases for contracts and RFPs, requests for proposals, especially in the public sector. You have to be able to show, if I give you this money, how are you going to manage the quality of the programs you're delivering with my money, right? Improved corporate quality image. And again, a lot of this ties to value recognition. Having that ISO stamp is going to give people a little bit of priming. They're going to look for quality if you say it's there. Whereas if you don't mention quality, they might not look for it. They might not recognize it. And remember, value recognition is something that we really want to hammer home. Suppliers are going to be motivated to conform because they know that they have to do business in a standardized way. Why is this good? Well, it gives us more standardization and more ethical orientation in the decisions taking place, not just in our own organization's value stream, but also in the larger supply chain and the system. So remember, we're talking about a quality management system. And I want you to think in terms of systems thinking. How does quality in the organization generate value beyond the organization and position the organization to have more opportunities, right? And this is not something that's foreign. It's not something that's difficult to understand. We've all had instances where we did really well the first time around, and as a result, we had confidence and we had people who believed in us, so the second time around wasn't that difficult. Conversely, we've all had experiences where we fell flat on our asses. We didn't do what we thought we were going to do, and we ended up having to do some value checking, do some gut checking, right? That's part of life, and that's okay. We want a reduction in customer audits. So we want our customers to trust us so that they're not auditing to see if we are missing numbers or in some way not delivering the value that we're supposed to. It gives us a competitive edge, not just in the sense that we're able to brand ourselves as being oriented toward quality, but probably more importantly, we're producing quality products. And when you produce quality products, people like to buy them. Right? I also know that if you are producing quality products, I can rely on your products, so I'm going to have more confidence in them. I'm probably going to have higher satisfaction, and that is probably going to spill over into my net promoter score. I'm going to be more willing to recommend a company that is focused on quality to my friends and family members, right? And then finally, there's something to be said about working for an organization that produces quality goods and services. There's a pride that comes along with it, knowing that your product stands the test of time, knowing that your service is one that truly adds value. It gives you a little bit more of a sense of purpose in the workplace. And sometimes we need that, don't we? Sometimes it's difficult when we get bogged down in filling out forms and doing paperwork and answering emails and scheduling meetings that we forget we should be proud of the work that we're doing, right? Over a third of our lives is invested in the office. It ought to be something that we are getting something out of, right? So we talk about quality not just as an organization or a system dynamic. Quality is something that we can think of as a personal dimension of our lives, right? The quality of our workplace lives. Okay. Now, notice here, we're not saying that you have to produce a product in a certain way or have certain features. We're not trying to standardize or limit the number of products that can be produced. We're trying to focus on quality being integrated into the process. Right? Oh, sorry, skipped a slide there. So we're wanting to understand consistency. We're wanting to be able to meet requirements or customer expectations. We want to achieve effective process performance, going back to one of our classmates' original definitions of quality. And we want to improve our ability to use and analyze data to integrate that data, those findings, into enhancing quality and continuous improvement for our product or service. Okay. How does the plan, do, check, act cycle look? Well, this is how it looks. Right. And I gotta hide my little banner here, I think. There we go. So how does it look? This is how it looks when you draw it out. Notice it's a cycle. And it's not a cycle that, it's not a one direction map. It's a cycle. And notice that there are feedback loops throughout, all tied to leadership. So we talk about management being keeping a system in line with expectations, maintaining the status quo, keeping our nose above the water. Leadership in the context of this ISO means positioning the organization for a vision related to quality, right? So quality isn't something that we just do. Quality is the heart and soul of what we do, right? That's leadership. How do we integrate that perspective through leadership and change management? We do it by being involved in each of these steps of the process, right? So we're trying to raise confidence in our ability to consistently, right, not just every so often, but consistently, reliably provide goods and services that conform with expectations. The most recent iteration of ISO, or the one from 2015, tells us that risk should be part and parcel of our discussion, saying the organization shall determine the processes needed within the quality management system and their application throughout, and shall address the risks and opportunities that come along. In other words, quality management is about managing risk. And we do that by looking at the likelihood and potential impact that a risk could have. The one thing that I would say is, look in bold here, we're looking also at the other side of risk, and that is opportunity. So we're not just auditing for compliance or to avoid risk, we're doing it to identify opportunities for value creation and process improvement. What are we doing specifically related to risk? We're looking that to see if the quality management system itself works, if it does what it says it does, and if it produces desirable results. Once we have assessed those risks, now we want to look at how to integrate the lessons learned into the implementation of actions to improve quality. Right? In other words, we're going to take measures to ameliorate or identify ways to manage risk as part of quality, right? Because any risk is going to be a risk to the quality of our processes or the quality of our ultimate products or services. Right? This includes a management review per clause 9 that says the management review shall be planned and carried out, taking into consideration what has been done to address risks and opportunities. Right? So one thing you're going to ask yourself as an auditor or as a trainer is, the organization has brought me in. They want me to enhance their quality. What have they done to address risks, right? And how are they using the information from improving their risk management to also speak to the PDCA and quality management process? Okay. Risk-based thinking is something that we all kind of do naturally. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's our default. It's called system one thinking, and we evolved to survive, right? The first thing that we try to do is continue living. And so we have a lot of automaticity. When we see things, we often interpret them very quickly based on past experience, based on mental representations, based on heuristics. One issue associated with that is we might end up painting with too broad a brush and not seeing the nuances in a particular situation, right? So risk-based thinking is something that we want to inculcate. It's something we want to develop, but we also want it to coincide with critical thought about risks, right? And the idea here is twofold. First, it will help us to identify legitimate risks. It'll also help us to understand how those risks affect quality and how improving management of them in processes is going to prevent negative action, right? So things like nonconformity, noncompliance, products that get recalled, consumers that are unhappy. So really what we're thinking about is risk as the opportunity to take a chance to achieve an objective, right? And there's risk associated with anything. We're never going to be able to mitigate, manage, or do away with all risk, nor would we want to, because that would mean we probably lived in a sanitized environment, right? Like a zoo or a library, a laboratory. So we want a little risk because it keeps life exciting, but we want to proactively manage that risk. And the one thing that you ought to consider about the PDCA and ISO 9001 in general, we don't want to make the same mistake twice, right? We're going to make mistakes. That is a given. Where we deliver value is in learning from those mistakes so that we don't repeat them. So having a quality management system in place not only helps us to identify ways that we can take advantage of or manage risks, it also gives us a broader perspective on risk as opportunity, right? Successful companies intuitively take a risk, well, by starting a business, right? Most businesses fail. It's a pretty big risk to start one. It's also a big risk to look somebody in the eye and say, I will consistently deliver quality goods and services. That's a commitment that you're making. And once you make it, you're committed to it, right? You are married to that statement. So it means you should take it seriously, right? And we want to use this as an opportunity to proactively prevent risk and identify opportunities. How do we do that? What's the single most important facet of being able to do this in our organization? Communication. We're going to want to know what our line workers, what our middle managers, what our top brass all consider to be risks and why. And what we might discover is that we have similar notions of risks. It might also be the case that we have different views on what constitutes risk or opportunity. So this can be tied again to organization strategy that's co-created with everybody in the organization having a voice. Right? And why do we want to do that? Because the more diverse opinions we can have, the more likely we are to identify lapses in our judgment or gaps in our thinking, right? Because remember, we're trying to improve not just the processes, but the way that we think about them. And in order to do that, what we're saying is the biggest risk you have to take as an individual is vulnerability. You have to be willing to be wrong to learn. You have to be able to say, I'm not perfect, I'm going to make mistakes, because all of us, no matter how much experience or how much effort we put in, can always improve. Nobody's perfect. No organization is perfect. So when we're going in to lead an audit or help people with an internal audit or train them, we are going to want to look specifically at context. So in your particular organization, your industry, your service area, what does your risk register look like? Right? We're going to want to look at what we are willing to accept, and every organization has an acceptable risk appetite, right? They're willing to take on, and again, we all have to be willing to take on at least some risks. So the question isn't whether organizations are completely risk averse or not. The question is the degree to which risk is something they're willing to engage in. Why are we willing to engage in risk? Well, because we have a vision. You're willing to get in the car with somebody if they tell you, hey, this is where we're going, right? If they talk to you, you know that person. Whereas a stranger who pulls up and says, get in, and doesn't tell you where you're going, you're probably not going to be as quick to jump in the car, right? It also helps us to plan ways that we can actively avoid risk so that we get, again, don't make the same mistake twice. We might even look at ways that we can eliminate the risk, or at least mitigate it, or find some other way to control it. And then when it comes to implementation, we're talking about taking action. Did what we implemented, the program, the risk management strategy, the approach, the quality management system, did it do what it said it was going to do? Right? That's the study part of the plan, do, study, act cycle. Did it do what it's supposed to do? Why or why not? And how are we going to learn? And we don't just learn from our own organization, we learn from other organizations, right? Especially partners in the systems in which we operate. And I would venture to guess that most of us in this room, in the work that we do, we are involved with at least one other and sometimes multiple other organizations. And I'm thinking specifically about the military. For every federal government employee employed directly by the federal government, there are 9 contractors on average doing the same job, right? And I think that's something that you've probably seen. Is that fair? Lots of contractors on bases, lots of contractors in towns, that sort of thing. And so we're talking about accountability being something that goes beyond the organization. And how do we have common conversations about that accountability, about that responsibility? We do it by having this basis of quality, right? There's some cheese. Okay, how do we deal with risk? Well, we look at it in 2 perspectives, right? How likely is it to occur? And what would the consequences be if it did, right? So the severity of a bread truck crashing through my door right now and killing me is pretty high, right? I don't want to die. I don't want to get hit by a bread truck. The likelihood of that happening is pretty low, right? So if I spend a lot of money building a concrete barrier between my kitchen wall and the road to prevent a bread truck coming in, I might be wasting my money. On the other hand, if it was very likely that I was going to be run over, then my urgency would increase because I would see it as a more severe risk. And you'll see these different risk categories. They're all associated with a combination of likelihood and severity, ranging from slight with little to no actual potential for damage to catastrophic with uncontrolled outcomes and effects that spill over. When we talk about catastrophic, we might be talking about a fatality. So risk ranges, and it doesn't make sense to put the same amount of effort into managing every risk. We want the risks that are most likely and most severe to be the ones that we address first in a triage kind of way. Again, if we had unlimited resources, we would address every risk we could, but we're not able to do that, nor are we able to identify all of those risks because we don't operate with perfect rationality. So this is what we use to score risks, and depending on where a risk falls, we have different processes in place based on quality management to address those, right? When we think about broad categories, you might see strategic, financial, operational, and reputational. And again, just to review, with strategy, we're talking about vision. Where do we want to go? What are we trying to accomplish as an organization, right? Financial, that one's pretty simple. Do we have the money? Are we spending it efficiently? Operational, are we standardizing our processes? Are we reducing rework? Are we reducing defects? Are we getting more and more quality? Are we getting the basis of what will become our reputational assessment? And that is, are we getting satisfied customers who are willing to promote or otherwise advocate our program or service to other people, right? So what is our reputation? Often what happens is we see a false dichotomy or a firewall constructed between devs and ops, right? Development and operations. And we see this in the public sector reflected in what's called the politics administration dichotomy. The idea that is development or legislation is the expression of the state's will, whereas operations or administration is the execution of the state's will. And notice here that this is a little bit misleading because in the public sector, as the example we're using, a member of Congress might not know anything about NASA, but if a NASA project is taking place in their district, they're going to want to know something about it and they're going to want to influence it. Similarly, how can that same member of Congress write legislation to govern the activity of NASA when that person doesn't have the requisite professional training in aeronautical engineering, right? So this is a false dichotomy that we often present so that we're able to talk about conceptual clarity. In healthy organizations oriented toward quality, we don't see this as a wall of confusion. Instead, we see it as an opportunity for communication, right? And in line with the DevOps philosophy, what we're going to want is grassroots communication that anybody in the organization can be a part of, along with continuous integration and continuous improvement. Okay. There are lots of ways that we can see quality diminish across each phase or component piece of our production process, right? So we're not looking at any one area or any one facet of the production process as being the central focus. Instead, we're saying we want to look at all aspects of our operations and ensure that we're building quality in. Because in doing so, we are creating defense against potential risk. Okay. Now you've heard about it again and again. Do you think this is important? Do you think you'll see it again? Again, this is the basis of the ISO, also the epistemological and procedural basis for several other ISOs, right? So how does it work? Well, we plan, first off, by talking to stakeholders, those who are involved, those who know things, and we say, what are we trying to do in terms of delivering quality and managing risk? From there, we're going to again, carry out the activities. We're going to check those. We're going to monitor those. And we're going to look at some pretty sophisticated metrics. We're going to look at the cost of quality. We're going to look at the cost of poor quality, the cost of delay. So a lot of Lean, a lot of Six Sigma principles can be integrated as hands-on tools for this process, right? And then once we check, we're going to act. So we're going to take that information and see what we can do with it. Okay? And if you want to see this in terms of the organization structure, there's a structure chart. Okay. So what are our focal areas with ISO 9001? To review, first, a customer focus. We want to deliver value and satisfy customers. And remember, the definition of quality that we're working with across industries, across organizations is customer satisfaction. Okay? Leadership. And again, this is a lot more about creating a vision for strategic change and implementing it through quality management and risk management than it is about your everyday maintenance of the status quo that we find in your typical management functions. So management is definitely part of what we're talking about, but leadership is something that's distinct and needed. Right? Engagement of people, and that ties directly to leadership. An effective leader is going to engage people, get their ideas so that they feel more ownership in creating this quality management system. Right? We're also going to be able to get different perspectives from different areas of our operations so that we get a more complete picture of risk, of quality, and of value delivery. Process approach. Right here, we're talking about the plan, do, check, act cycle and using data to inform future planning iterations. So when we talk about the process, the main thing to remember is you're using the plan, do, check, act cycle, and you're using it iteratively for continuous improvement, not just for a one-time shebang. Next, evidence-based decision making. That's the check or the act component of the PDCA. And what we're saying is we are basing future decisions on evidence that we've collected in line with what we planned and did before, right? So we're not going to make the same mistake twice, and we're going to integrate those findings into further planning iterations so that this becomes a cyclical system of quality management. Remember that word, system. And then finally, relationship management. This is internally, of course, between teams, subunits, functional areas, rank levels, but also relationship management with our stakeholders and particularly with our customers, because ultimately we're trying to create quality so that we can point to it and get repeat customers who refer their friends, neighbors, dog catchers, and anybody else that'll buy our stuff, right? So looking at these principles, you can find some operational definitions here if you want to hang your hat on them. I think we did a pretty good job of getting those lined up. Some keywords here. We're talking about quality management, but within quality management, we've got quality planning. So what are we doing here? We're setting our objectives. We're saying, do we have the necessary operational resources and do we have the appropriate processes in place to manage quality? The next thing we want to consider is quality assurance. How much confidence do we have that we are going to produce quality goods and services? Quality control. How are we limiting exceptions to our quality requirements? And how are we focused on maintaining those quality requirements? And then finally, quality improvement. How are we going to increase our capacity, our ability, our processes, our methodology, our resource allocation? How are we going to change our strategy and our planning so that quality continues to be improved in the next iteration, in the next cycle? Right? What is auditable here? All of these. So are you tailoring your risk management and your quality management approach to the context of the organization in which you operate, right? If you are not tailoring to your sector or industry, then you might find that your quality management system doesn't have enough specificity. It doesn't have enough specificity to allow going into detailed sophisticated descriptions of functions and skills and job descriptions, right? It also limits our ability to deal with immediate risks and risks that are likely and severe in the context of our organization, right? So what we're looking for first as auditors is, do the people in the organization understand the unique contextual features and how that relates to risk, quality, value delivery, and customer satisfaction? Okay. The next thing we're looking for again is leadership. How are we communicating a vision of change? How are we bringing in divergent voices? How are we allowing opportunities for co-creation? And how are we creating a vision that is coherent that people can look at and say, yeah, I buy into that. I want to support it. That's what change management is. Next, planning, right? The process by which you are planning your QMS is auditable. So what are we going to look for in how we plan? Well, we're going to look for risk. We're going to look for lessons learned historically. We're going to look for guardrails written into our SOPs and into our procedures that help to mitigate, control, manage, or even disappear some risks while also taking advantage of opportunities. We're going to look at the degree of support. Now, this is buried in here, but I think it's probably one of the most important parts of the QMS, right? We can say all day that we believe in doing something. We can even come up with the best methodology in the world for doing it. But if we're not providing support in the form of organizational resources, then we're probably not going to be successful, right? I know that some of us have worked in organizations that claimed to care about one area or one cause, but maybe the budget document for that organization didn't reflect the level of concern that they espoused. Does that ever happen to you? You ever work for an organization that say, we value this, but there's no money, there's no resources, there's no time committed to it? We see this a lot of times with sustainability, right? We call it greenwashing. People say, hey, I am an environmental proponent. I slapped a sticker on my product, but did I really commit to sustainability? Or this month, especially, Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Awareness Month, you see more pink products for sale than any other time in the year. And the idea is we want to associate ourselves with breast cancer awareness because it's a nice social cause. Well, that's nice. What do we do to promote healthcare for our own employees? What do we do to improve quality outcomes for stakeholders? What are we doing to make the world a better place while we ask for it to be become a better place? Okay. Those are important questions. So are we putting our money where our mouth is? Because we can have the best plans and the best procedures, but if we don't have money, we don't have man, woman power, we don't have technology, it's not likely we're going to be successful. And we need those a lot of times on the front end to get started. Next is operations, and this is what we tend to think of with lean. We tend to think of it with Six Sigma. We tend to think about this in the context of industrial or manufacturing settings. When we're talking about operations, we're talking about how are you doing the work? Specifically, how are you doing the work in a way that is aligned with quality and aligned with producing a product that's going to be viable and desirable, right? So, and maybe even if we're lucky, delight our customers. Once we have carried out our activities, now we want to say, hey, what do we have in place to evaluate our performance? Does the organization have an instrument? Do they have metrics? Have they identified variables that they want to measure from their operations? And how are they using that information to evaluate performance? And ideally, what they're doing is evaluating performance in the context of how it can be improved. So this is all about learning and continuous improvement. So essentially what you're making the commitment to as an ISO accredited organization, you're making the commitment to continuously improving. And that's no small commitment. That's hard work. Something that we want to keep in mind, though, is that continuous improvement doesn't take the form of big bang, magic miracles overnight as much as it tends to take incremental learning, right? In the same way that we learned to ride a bicycle, we had to fall down a couple of times to get better. So when we start out working with organizations that are new to quality management, they might be a little bit afraid. If you break it down into something very simple, like, hey, all we want to do is look at whether your operations are supporting your mission through performance evaluation and how that can be improved, you can tell them that on an elevator and assuage their fears, right? Information is power. And when we tell people about ways that they can become more compliant and gear up to be ready for an audit, they feel more powerful. They themselves are more empowered, have more agency, and as a result can improve quality in their organization. And that's what all of this is about. Okay. That's the big takeaway from the whole class. Okay. So we looked at different dimensions of the ISO, understanding context, understanding requirements. And again, your legal requirements are going to vary a lot of times by sector of the economy. For instance, if you're a nonprofit organization, well, you can't make a profit, right? You're going to have regulatory requirements that govern your particular industry or the field of service in which you're operating. And those aren't just United States regulatory requirements. You might have heard recently we have reduced our involvement in global environmental compacts, things like the Paris Accords and the SDGs. If we plan to do business in Europe or elsewhere in the world, we still have to keep in mind toward complying with those because uh, those are legal requirements that would bar us from doing business in other parts of the world. Contractual obligations, and here we might want to think about planning effective contracts as part of our quality management system, making sure that we have consistency and expectations in the obligations we assign contractors so that we can hold them accountable in a standard way, right? So we're updating these in order to understand and anticipate needs or expectations. And the big takeaway here is things change, right? Your customer expectations or requirements are not going to be static, nor should your processes. If you're standing still, you're eventually going to drown. If you're doing more, that is, you have identified a spot of land and you are making strides toward it ever so slowly, it's much more likely that you're not going to drown because you're focused on improving daily, not just every time there's an audit cycle or every fiscal year when you have to justify your budget. Okay. So the context that we're talking about is an amalgam of all these different factors, right? The economy matters. People are more willing to buy things when the economy is better. Products, right? What's available, right? What technology exists and what have we seen in the way of innovations? Interested parties, those can be our customers, stakeholders, regulatory agencies, competitors. Lots of people can fit into that lump. And then, as we talked about, legal requirements. We don't want to be sued. We don't want to cause harm. We don't want to fall out of line with legal expectations and end up in jail, right? So we want to fit our quality management system to the particular context. We want to tailor to our particular context, right? And we often think about that with quality, right? When we think about higher end products, we think about products that are tailored to a particular person, like a wedding dress is a good example. Determining the process approach. So how are we going to determine the process of our quality management system? We're first going to look at the variables, right? What are we putting in as an independent variable and what are we getting out as a dependent variable? And what is the causal relationship? In other words, are we seeing that there's interaction, that is correlation, but are we also seeing, in addition to correlation, some degree of causality? Are we seeing a causal relationship, or are we seeing a relationship that might be produced by a third spurious variable, right? So if we looked at just the correlation and we said, oh my God, ice cream sales and murder rates are correlated at about 0.96. And in Pearson's R that runs from -1 to 1, that's a pretty strong correlation. It's almost a perfect one. What if we took legislative action to ban ice cream? Well, we might not see a reduction in murder rates. Why? There's a third variable that's driving the consumption and purchase of ice cream and murder rates, and that is heat. Specifically, more ice cream places are open to sell you ice cream and more people are out. Right? So the idea of having more interaction, especially in heat, could lead to frustration, or it could just be a numbers game, right? If you're a murderous person and you want to murder somebody in Illinois in the winter, you're going to have to wait until it's warm enough for people to come outside. So if we address ice cream as our root cause, what we'll discover is it doesn't have the intended effect. So we want to look at the variables that we are including in risk and quality management to determine whether they are, in fact, first off, measuring what they purport to, and second, demonstrating a reflection of a causal relationship that can be improved through quality management. Okay? That's going to give us criteria, it's going to give us new performance indicators, and it's going to give us an idea of the resources that we need to implement these systems. Okay? This is also where we're going to assign functional responsibilities and authorities. And remember, we're talking here about your duties. Accountability isn't assigned to you, it's just a free gift that comes along with it. So in addition to your duties, you're also going to be expected to manage expectations from a variety of sources. Right? Risks and opportunities. Again, we want to enhance quality by minimizing the risk with which we are exposing our organization and maximizing the opportunities for our organization to see valuable outcomes. And we want to do all this while maintaining documentation. And this isn't just so that we have it on file for an auditor to come in and look at. It's also so that we can use it to feed into the iterative quality development processes that we're putting into our organization. Because remember, we made a commitment to doing that in perpetuity. Right? What about leadership? Well, we want leadership to espouse a quality policy, and we want them to have the ability to demonstrate accountability for the QMS. In other words, they're going to say everybody has a role, a voice, a say, but ultimately, I'm taking responsibility. I'm taking accountability. If it goes poorly, I'm going to manage those expectations. Why do we want that in leadership? We want that because it gives followers the sense that they can mess up, right? If I tell you I'm going to take accountability for the failure, then all of a sudden you don't have as much pressure on you, right? And that's really what leadership's about sometimes, is taking the fear away by saying, hey, I'm here and it's on me as your leader, right? Ensuring objectives are established and communicated. And that's especially true with communication, right? We're not always going to see alignment in communication between people in functional areas that differ, right? Software developers and marketing people might not always be able to communicate smoothly. The quality management system and the leadership of it should account for that. We should create language that's accessible as well as useful for everybody in our organization, because we want this to be a system-wide process. We want to ensure that the resources needed for implementing our QMS are available. We want to ensure that it achieves its intended results. And remember, we're doing that by studying the results and the data that we get. We want to promote engagement. So we want everybody in the organization to participate in it, because the more data points we have, the better picture we're able to get of the organization's operations. Right? And then finally, we want leaders to support other management roles. Okay? And that could be your example quality policy. It's in your student file if you want to use it. I would recommend playing around with an LLM and looking at ways that a quality policy could be written specifically for the organizations in which you operate, right? And I'm not saying produce it in ChatGPT and take it in and say, hey, here's your quality policy. Use it as the basis of what you might want to consider in a particular company's context. Okay. This is especially true if there have been quality issues in the company before, if there have been lawsuits, if there have been recalls, if there have been other things that have cast the company into ill repute, right? We're going to want to look to see if those are being addressed in the quality policy. Okay. How do we demonstrate good leadership? Well, we ask questions of the people working in our systems. We ask questions of our stakeholders. We ask questions of our customers. And ideally, we're going to provide opportunities for engagement and feedback. And in doing so, we're going to create sufficient psychological safety that people feel safe in challenging a dominant perspective or an idea. Because remember, we only learn through unlearning, through challenging previously held beliefs. So we want to create conditions where anybody in the organization who recognizes a flaw is able to raise their hand and say, hey, that's a flaw. Why do we want that? Well, when we don't get that, we tend to get groupthink. We tend to get consensus as our default and the idea that people want to go along to get along. And sometimes that can have some pretty disastrous outcomes. One of the perennial examples used in public administration is the Bay of Pigs invasion. Robert McNamara, the defense secretary, knew pretty well that it was going to be an abysmal failure. He still allowed it to proceed because President Kennedy had sort of a cult of personality, and a lot of his advisors sought his favor because he was a charismatic, enigmatic guy. And as a result, the Bay of Pigs fiasco took place and embarrassed our entire nation. Right? So we want to create conditions where we don't have that, even if it means my little ego has to be bruised, even if it means I have to be wrong. We want to create conditions where it's okay to be wrong because that means somebody is offering critical insight, which is exactly what we want in the scientific method, right? So we're asking our own workforce to be involved in helping to develop improvement. Not only does that help us to identify things that only they can see, it also gives them the ability to feel as if their voice matters, right? So we're talking there about the concept of efficacy. And the more efficacy I have, the more I believe my voice matters, the more willing I am to use it. If I believe that people are going to listen and I can affect change, I'm going to use my voice more often. Okay? There are other examples of leadership that are available here, but I think you get the general idea, and that is be willing to communicate, be vulnerable, create opportunities, right? And follow your own rules. How about that one? If a manager sets a standard and doesn't follow it themselves, that standard is meaningless. So if we expect others to comply toward a quality management, value-driven approach, and we're not doing that ourselves, well, we're hypocrites. And we lose the legitimacy with which we can approach interactions with our employees. We can't come to them and say, hey, I need you to do better. Right? If we're not holding ourselves to that standard, we can't ask people to be excellent. We might also see managers go rogue, right? They don't engage the workforce. They think they know best. They impose from the top down. Those organizations are becoming less and less present in society. They're dying off because they don't work anymore, right? Top down, big bang, waterfall approaches to product development and service delivery were the purview of the 20th century. The 21st century demands iteration. It demands accountability. It demands across the organization access to information and ability to communicate. Right? What's top management doing in terms of leadership? All this stuff. And the essence of it is we're looking to make sure that we're following the plan, do, check, act cycle. When it comes to risks, we've talked extensively about what risk management is supposed to do. We're trying to prevent or reduce undesired effects or outcomes while achieving continual improvement and taking advantage of opportunities. So when it comes to addressing risks, we have to say, are the actions that we're taking effective? And are they proportionate to the potential impact? Again, am I building a fence or am I calling an ambulance, right? Because we can call an ambulance every time somebody goes off the cliff, and that's one solution, but maybe it might be more sensible in the quality sense long term to build a fence to prevent that from happening, to manage that risk from the onset, right? So are we doing what is necessary in light of the likelihood and severity of a risk occurring to address that risk proactively, right? Not retroactively, not respond to it after it's happened, but account for the possibility that it could happen and incorporate that into the quality decisions that we're making, right? How are we going to do that? We're going to establish objectives, and we want those objectives to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. What do I mean by specific? We have variables that we are measuring. What do I mean by measurable? We have metrics. We have operationalized these variables and assigned them a metric to gauge their presence, absence, and effect. We want to be consistent with quality policy. We want to take into account applicable requirements. We want to identify the resources, and that's just not just money, right? It's technology, equipment, man and woman power, support from a sponsor. All kinds of things go into resources. We want to come up with a timeline. Remember, our goals and objectives, we want to be smart. And part of that time base is it gives us the ability to hold ourselves accountable. If we say we're going to do something by a specific time, we either did it or we didn't. Be measurable and be evaluated. In other words, we want to be able to come up with an ideally quantitative way to measure, but also include qualitative dimensions, right? Depth, context. We're talking about planning. The first question that we might want to ask is, what are you trying to achieve, or where do you want to be? If you're trying to get 9001 certified as an organization, you are signaling that quality is something that you're trying to achieve. Managing quality, developing consistency, adding value, and satisfying customers, that's what you're trying to achieve. So where are we right this minute? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? In other words, what am I trying to achieve? I'm trying to achieve quality. The consequences of that are going to be standardization, uniformity, consistency, satisfied customers, right? What resources are required? Well, we have to have money, technology, man and woman power, and know-how, right? Knowledge management systems to help us with internal audits, to help us with compliance, to help us with planning, doing, checking, and acting. What will happen if people do or do not fulfill their roles, and how will this affect the other areas? In other words, we're looking at contingencies, and we're looking at the system in which the organization's operating, right? So we're saying there are unique individual level variables for the organization and each role, and then there are the ways in which they operate with one another and intersect with one another. Okay. Going through 7, we're talking about here resources, competence, awareness, communication. Okay. Very simply, we're talking about people. Okay. When we're talking about resources, you got to have, first off, personnel. The number one expenditure of any organization tends to be their personnel. Infrastructure. So do you have a place to do the work? Do you have electricity? Process environment. So are you creating a safe workplace? Are you creating a workplace that's free from harassment, from bias, from unnecessary exposure to the elements, from unnecessary unsafety, right? Monitoring. What are you using to monitor and collect information? And in lean organizations today, a lot of that's done through the Internet of Things. We have devices attached to different equipment that feeds data continuously. In the public and nonprofit sectors, we tend to see that more of a human-driven kind of thing, but we want to monitor and measure things that count. We also demonstrate values in choosing our measures, don't we? Because if we can count it, then it counts. And if we choose not to count it, maybe what we're saying is it doesn't count, right? It's not important. And then finally, organization knowledge. What are we doing in terms of creating a repository of lessons learned, a repository of metric information, longitudinal data? What are we doing to manage the knowledge we're creating to continue to improve our organization and to look at trends longitudinally in service delivery and value and risk management in all these other areas, right? We want to be able to determine the competence of people working and make sure that people are doing jobs that they are qualified to do. That's part of quality, right? The same reason you don't take your car to the barber for a repair, or the same reason you don't go to the mechanic for a haircut, unless you're in a really small town where they also sell beer bait and ammo, right? And I've lived in those towns. So we want competence. We want to ensure that people have adequate training to develop and improve those competencies. And then we want to retain information, right? We want to have certifications or transcripts like you'll get from Star Global that say, yeah, this person has indeed completed this training and has the requisite knowledge and competence to carry out their duties in the organization under the quality management system, right? We want people to be familiar with the quality policy, and ideally here, the quality policy is going to be part and parcel of the organization's culture, right? We want them to be familiar with quality objectives that are relevant to their functional area. We want them to understand how they contribute to not just their functional area, but the overall sense of quality in the organization. And we want them to know the consequences for noncompliance, including sanctions from the legal world, sanctions from the regulatory world, and sanctions especially from customers who might lose faith in our services. The organization is wanting to determine how to communicate through the medium it's going to use, how frequently, with whom, and how. And we'll notice here when we're dealing with stakeholders, depending on their level of influence and interest in our project, we are going to have, or in our product, we're going to have different levels of engagement with those stakeholders, right? There's some people who just aren't going to like what we're doing no matter what we're doing. And there are some people who are going to be very heavily invested. We ought to tailor our quality management and stakeholder management approaches in a way that helps us to deal with those who are the most likely sources of influence. Okay. What do we want in the QMS? Well, you can read all this, but the idea is we want documents and records. We want documents to be maintained and updated. We want version control, and we want these records to be retained so that they can be called out in an audit as artifacts of the organization's performance or alignment with the ISO. Okay. General rules for documents, we want them to be identifiable, right? We want to know what they are. Ideally, they would be in a set format organization-wide so that auditors can look at each piece of data, each independent report, and not have to adjust their perceptual lenses, right? We want to review and approve our documents. We want to control them, and that means not just access, it also means version control. We want to make sure that everybody's using the same version so that we're not talking past one another. Adequately protected, and that goes into cybersecurity, that goes into passwords, and that's another facet of quality, right? And then finally, controlled for. How are we distributing these? How are we controlling access, retrieval, storage, yada, yada, yada. This is what we would previously call documents and records in the old ISO. Okay. What should we retain? Well, anything that has to do with hiring, anything that has to do with sanctioning, anything that has to do with safety, anything that has to do with employee performance, anything that has to do with customer complaints. In other words, we ought to keep very thorough records because the more data we have, the more information we're going to have about how quality manifests in these different areas, right? So we want rich sources of data and varied sources of data. Okay. When it comes to operational planning, right? This is where the rubber hits the road. We first have to ask, what are the requirements, right? In other words, what are stakeholders asking for? What do our customers want? How do we know that they're willing to accept those once the work has been completed? How do we know how many resources we need in terms of dollars, people, technology, pieces of equipment? Right? How are we implementing control of the processes? In other words, how are we using our criteria from quality management to control our processes and keep them within acceptable limits of control? In Lean Six Sigma, we might talk then about, say, the upper control and lower control limits. But generally, what we're saying is, can we expect that there's going to be minimal variation in products and services, no matter who's working at the machine or which stakeholder is being addressed? Yeah. Communication with customers. Well, this is pretty simple, right? We want to provide customers information, telling them what we're selling so they'll buy it. We want to handle their orders, their questions. We want to obtain feedback, especially complaints, right? And a lot of times we'll shy away from complaints or negative feedback. We'll say, I don't want to hear that. Hearing positive comments about your product doesn't do much to help you improve, does it? If all I hear my whole life is you're doing a great job, then I never feel any urge to try to do better, right? So when we're talking about customers, we ought to look not just at their complaints, we ought to look at the ways that we're satisfying them on the front end and how we're establishing requirements. Okay? And then again, we want these to be contextually tailored to the service area, the geographical location, the legal jurisdiction, the industry, the sector, right? So all of that is going to be stuff that you do independently and working in your interventions using the quality management system, the plan, do, check, act cycle as the basis, right? When it comes to the processes, we can break it down into these components. So what's going into planning, what's going into doing, what's going into controlling, how are we looking at our outputs, and I think more importantly, what outcomes are we having? In other words, what outcomes are we having that relate to overall organization quality and the aspiration to manage that quality, right? We ought to include the same criteria, equally stringent criteria for vendors, right? People in the supply chain with whom we work, because ultimately our customers are going to be affected by their products, right? How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that in a variety of ways. Okay? We're going to look at our suppliers and say, this is what you need to do. We're going to operationally define what you're going to provide us. We're going to tell you how we're going to monitor your performance and evaluate it, and we're going to hold you accountable, right? That's the essence of what we're asking from our suppliers. A good rule of thumb is to have a document for all suppliers in an organization so that you have uniformity in those records, right? And again, you want conformity, not just an acceptance criteria. And what that means is people are generally on board and agreeing that what you are delivering is what they asked for, right? What they wanted to be satisfied. The new standard from 2018 requires control of non-conforming products and services to be documented. In other words, if people are dissatisfied, part of quality management is to document that. And that isn't so you can create a wall of shame. It's so that you can start to notice patterns. It's so that you can start to investigate common areas where you are falling short and know where to improve. Okay? What needs to be monitored and measured, and how are we going to do it? And again, we want that not just for our own organization, we want that throughout our supply chain. Okay. And these are what we're going to be looking for again in those metrics. Okay. We want to conduct internal audits first off so that we can see the degree to which the organization is prepared for the real show, right? The real meaningful audit that could bring sanctions or could bring certification. So when we want to look at audits, we want to conduct them with regular intervals as often as possible so that we can get more information into the pipeline of continuous improvement. Right? Evidence in our audits, when we're creating our audit documents, here's what we're looking for, right? We're looking at the criteria of the audit and the scope for each. In other words, what is it that we're looking for? In the case of 9001 QMS, we're looking for those areas of compliance, right? Context, leadership, process, planning, performance evaluation, right? Select auditors to ensure objectivity and impartiality, so don't have people audit their own work because they might not give an honest assessment. And that might not be because they're dishonest. It might be because they have a little bit of a little bit of limited vision based on their deep role within a particular area. We want to make sure that audit results don't just go in a circular file somewhere. We want them to be communicated to management and throughout the organization so they can be the basis of continued improvement. Right? We, of course, want evidence in our audit that the organization, if they've identified a nonconformity, they've identified a risk, they've identified a shortfalling in their quality, we want to see evidence that they have taken necessary steps to address those, right? In the same way that the health inspector would come back to the restaurant and want to see that changes were made based on the initial inspection that a restaurant maybe didn't pass or didn't do as well on as they had hoped, right? We want to review the QMS, and we want to do this because we want it to be a living document. We want to be able to look at the QMS and say, this is part and parcel of our strategy today, not 10 years ago, not 20 years ago, right? Because keeping up with QMS is also going to keep us aligned with market demands, with stakeholder expectations and requirements, with legal changes, with regulatory changes, with changes in the nature of business, right? So it's going to keep our organization fresh and it's going to keep us plugged into the heart of what we're doing. Okay. Get to section 10 here. This is about improvement. What are we doing if we see a nonconformity and how are we ensuring improvement? Okay. So what can we do? Well, we can react by correcting something that was wrong. We can incrementally try to get better. We can get creative and try to use innovation to drive improvement. Or we can completely transform a component of our organization's vision or operations. Okay. Nonconformities can take the form of a client complaint, an audit result showing that the QMS is not working effectively, is not designed appropriately, doesn't have adequate resources apportioned, doesn't include planning, doing, checking, or acting. Could be a supplier issue, right? We might find that the quality of our suppliers is low, and as a result, that affects the quality of the product that we're producing. Remember, we want to hold our suppliers to the same quality standards because they're involved in producing the product that has our name on it, right? We want to come up with a way to understand processes and procedural failure. When you get into lean, you'll talk a little bit more about FMEA and looking at failure modes, things that are common failures in different settings, different industries, different sectors, and how we can account for those proactively. Okay. Again, retain your documentation, and you want to retain not just the non-conformance report, but also what you've done in terms of corrective action in light of that non-conformity. Okay. And with that, we have reached the end of the slideshow, and I want to go into our case study before we get to the exam. I'm going to give you another 5 minutes just to stretch your legs. We'll come back, go through our case study, and then I'll give you instructions for registering for the exam that we'll all take as a group in just a bit. So take 5, stretch your legs, and I'll see you back at 9:25 Eastern, 8:25 Central. All right, pitter patter, let's get at her. I want to talk to you real quickly about the case study. We're going to go through it. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I just want to show you how you can apply what we've learned tonight in a real world case so that you feel a little more confident and a little more comfortable going into an audit. Once we knock that out, I'm going to ask you to register for the exam. You'll get the exam link is going to be provided, and you'll register for the exam. From there, you're going to get an email. You'll open the exam, and then once everybody's had a chance to open their exam, we'll go over it in class, and we'll talk about registration for the exam and things like that in just a second. But before that, let's get into our case study and just see some of this stuff in action. Kind of see the wheels moving. I like doing this because it gives us a little bit more of something to hang our hat on, right? Instead of talking about some vague organization that's doing this, we're talking about an organization that hopefully has at least some resonance with us, and that is going to be a healthcare nonprofit organization. So we'll start here with a fictitious case that I built with AI for tonight, just to go over some of these principles. And I'm not going to read it to you, but what I'm going to talk to you about is just a little bit of a recap, and this will help you in the form of exam review before you sit for your exam in just a few. So we know that it originated around the middle of the 20th century. We can trace its roots to Japan and the rebuild under Dr. Deming, right? It introduced a quality management system, and what we're looking for here again is consistency, customer satisfaction, and continuous improvement. Now, this didn't just come out of thin air, right? There had been other quality management approaches in the past, primarily in the military and in emergent industry. You might remember, say, Frederick Taylor's scientific management or Luther Gulick's Posdikorb. Okay. What we're doing here with 9001 that's unique compared to those approaches that came before is we're looking to align strategy with regard to quality. We're looking to align that strategy with meeting stakeholder expectations. Okay. So here we're talking about an organization that we're calling HHO. It adopted ISO 9001 principles after a period of donor concern over inconsistent client outcomes. So we see the need here is that donors are concerned about inconsistent client outcomes, and we want a way to assuage those fears, because if we don't, we won't get their money, right? The executive director is a lady named Elena Morales, and I want to make sure that you're seeing this, sorry. Dr. Elena Morales, she's proposed that adopting a QMS could stabilize program delivery. And we're to the PDCA. This is what we've talked about a lot tonight. The foundations are again in the work of Dr. Deming, beginning in Japan. Okay. When it comes to planning, HHO is going to begin by defining its quality objectives. It's going to reduce client wait time, standardize treatment plan documentation, and improve follow-up outcomes. Why are we doing that? So that we can identify bottlenecks. We can identify things where our work in process is, or a work in progress is piling up, right? We're also going to be looking at intake, and intake tends to be if there is a spot where value streams get most bogged down or corrupted or impeded, it's intake, right? Because what we do at intake is going to determine everything else that we have in terms of a customer interaction or a product development. Okay. When it comes to do, we're going to implement small scale pilots. And you'll see this a lot in quality management. The idea is we want to fail fast through small, lower stakes experiments so that we can accumulate knowledge that will prepare us for more high stakes, larger situations that we might encounter. So here, the nonprofit has emphasized an electronic scheduling system and data collection. What we're going to do is take that data in the check cycle after 3 months and conduct a pre-post test statistical assessment. We might be using a t-test or an ANOVA. What we're looking here is, did the intervention have a demonstrable effect on quality and customer satisfaction as well as donor satisfaction? And then depending on our findings, we're going to revise our workflow, revise our communication, revise our procedures. We might even update our quality manual and come up with new targets or objectives that are in line with our resources, our capabilities, and those expectations that have been communicated. Okay. Now we're going to get to audit strategies, and this is probably an important part of the class because you're going to be doing audits, you're going to be training internal auditors. So what are we doing with internal audits? We're trying to make sure that one person who isn't directly responsible in an area has the ability to review and critically evaluate the quality management system. Okay. Why do we want that? So that we can identify nonconformities and conduct root cause analysis to identify the variables that are in fact causing the change, right? So we might ask the 5 whys. We might engage in fishbone analysis. There are lots of different ways to do this, but we're trying to get to the root because if we address the root cause, it's likely that we're going to see quality improvement, right? As opposed to addressing a symptom, we might fix that symptom but still have the disease, the sickness of ineffective quality management in our organization. And we do all this because the big boys, the big girls come and audit us. They want to see if we're compliant. If we say that we are producing quality goods, we better be able to prove it. How do we prove it? We prove it by, first off, documenting what we're doing, and secondly, integrating this PDCA. We talked a little bit about risk being an expanded category of quality management ever since the 2015 revision. And here we're talking about not just establishing a risk register and categorizing threats by their severity or impact or likelihood. Instead, we are looking at ways to make risk an opportunity for value delivery. Okay. So how are we going to perform this? Let's look at specific components of the ISO. So clause 4. In accordance with clause 4, this organization defined internal and external issues. They mapped stakeholders and they ensured that donor expectations aligned with client outcomes. And remember, that was their initial concern. According to clause 5, or in line with it, Dr. Morales chaired a monthly quality council, reinforcing accountability and providing opportunities for communication. Okay. So if you're an auditor going into this organization, communication is never a bad suggestion. Communication can always be improved, right? When it comes to planning, quality objectives were linked to strategic goals. In other words, we want the ultimate outcomes that we want to achieve as an organization tied to the daily work of producing them, right? Support, that is, what are we doing to train people, to allocate resources, to make equipment available, and otherwise demonstrate readiness and competence development in the employees. Operation, here we're looking again at what are we doing? Are we delivering services that were defined from intake to discharge, ensuring that they're standardized, consistent, reproducible, and have data integrity? Clause 9 is going to tell us to look for KPIs such as client satisfaction, staff retention, or other metrics. If we're saying we're evaluating something, we better have some measures. And then improvement, that comes from clause 10, lessons from audits being used to inform future planning iterations, right? And if you keep reading here, you'll see some lessons learned that you might learn from in developing your own audit reports. But the gist of it is we want to align our internal and external audits with those specific clauses within the ISO. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to you for a second and just check your pulse here. I'm going to stop screen sharing for 1 second here on that. And just checking your pulse here. Any questions so far? Any concerns before we get to the exam registration link and go into the exam? And don't be shy. If you have a question, I guarantee somebody else in the room has the exact same question, right? And you can put it on me. You can say, hey, you didn't explain this adequately, right? You're not gonna hurt my feelings. What you got? All right, we're all sleepy and we want to be done with this. I get it. Let's get to our exam link, and you're gonna see me share my screen one more time. We're gonna get to our exam linky link. Give me 1 second to pull that bad boy up. And I've got a lot going on in the world of sharing. So give me 1 second here, and I will work on unsharing for 1 second so I can open this other window. Shit. There we go. Got it.
I lost your audio.
All right, we're back. Sorry, I was trying to pull this link up, and I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that this is what I'm sharing on the old Zoomaroo. So I'm gonna pull this guy up, and here is our registration link. Okay. So what you're gonna do first off is open this link. It's provided in chat. You're gonna enter your full name, and that's the name that your government calls you, not the ones your buddies call you, or your mom, or whoever, because we want this to have your legitimate contact information on it. Use your email, use your personal one so that it's not rejected in a spam filter. Don't use your government or company email. This is probably the most important, so listen closely. Remember, Zach had mentioned he's providing the copy of the book for free, and he's going to mail it to you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I do not see the link. I see the paper that you put your name and everything. I just don't see the link.
Okay, give me 1 second, and I'll stick it back in chat for you.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
of course, no problem. And I thought I shared it to everybody, but I think I just opened it instead of sharing it. So give me
Yeah,
one
yeah.
hot second.
I took that class with you last week, and the same thing happened to me. I missed out on it.
Oh man, well, let's make sure that doesn't happen today. And give me 1 second here to get back in the old meeting. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this and stick it in chat, and then everybody will be able to pull it up. Give me one hot second to dump it in here. All right, so I'm messaging everyone right now with the link, and you should be able to see this one. Is everybody able to
Got it.
see it? Good deal. All right, so back to the matter at hand here, going over our exam. And I'm going to go back to my screen share. So again, your name, your email, your address, and remember, this is where you can be when Zach mails you this book, and it's going to be within 72 hours that he's going to put it in post. So where you're going to be probably in a week or so to make sure that you get this, because it's like getting $225 in the mail, right? So you want to be there. The certification exam that you're going to take is already pre-selected for you. It's 9001 Auditor, and you'll sign, pay, submit, and once you get all that done, you'll get the link to the exam. I'll give you a few minutes to get that knocked out, and then once we open the exam, we'll go over it as a group and see how we're doing and if anybody has any questions. So I'll give you a few minutes and shut up while you're filling out that form.
This is a lifetime certification, right, Doctor Casey?
Yes, sir. This doesn't require renewal, and the beauty of it is you don't have to worry about accumulating PDUs or CEUs. Once you're an
That's the best
auditor,
part.
yeah, it's fantastic, right? It's a gift that keeps on giving, because it means you can make money from this point forward with no more investment on your part, and that's pretty good, right? Especially with the
Totally.
rate for the exam, you're gonna make that up in the first hour of auditing. So
Yeah, and I just want to chime in, Casey. I wanted to apologize about all my notes that I've given you in the chat or the cell phone. I feel like I sound like a nag, but you've done has Dr. Casey not done an incredible night job tonight? Like I felt like I was just watching a nice ass documentary. Like it was so fun just listening to you talk. And
He did a
I
great
just
job.
yeah, you're I don't know, you might be better than me. Probably.
No, man, I really appreciate the opportunity, and this is the first time I've run through Star Global's version of 9001. So there were little hiccups here and there, especially with technology because I'm old and figuring that stuff out. But man, thanks so much for your patience with me, everybody, and thanks for coming tonight. I know that we work hard and we don't get a lot of free time, so coming here and investing in yourself shows that you live quality management, right? You're trying to improve what you know and what you're able to do, and that's really kick-ass, man. And that's those are the people I love working with. So, after class tonight, if you want to stay in touch, you have any questions, want to follow up, Zach's got my contact information. Reach out. I'll be happy to sit down with you and answer any questions that might come up. And if you find yourself in an audit situation down the road where you're wanting to conduct one of these and you hit some snags, give me a yell. We'll work. Right.
Wait on the LinkedIn. Wait on the LinkedIn until everybody registers for that link. Uh, and then after everybody's at the exam portal, because once you guys register, you'll get the exam emailed to you. Um, and then you'll go into the actual exam. And so from that exam, what will happen is it will shoot over after you get done with it. And it's a relatively easy exam as long as you were paying attention to things in class. Like I said, we're going to take it as a group. But the point of this exam is it's built as a learning activity and kind of a networking activity. So once you guys get done, we're going to give I'm going to let you guys register. I'm going to give you guys about another 5 minutes. Um, and so we covered a lot of material tonight, right? This book, and just so you guys are just listening and kind of going over, you guys, I'll mail this book. I've got to order the instructor copies, so just give me like a week and a half as a buffer to get it out to your location. I'm gonna place the order tonight after you guys get done. And basically, you'll go through, and everything in here has activities for the students. It goes slide by slide and you have examples, and that's the biggest thing here is like it's not just about just reading the PowerPoints, it's going in and talking about and I've put some turning points on there where I talk about like working with Ford, working with Amazon. What were some of the things that we did for better quality management? So like when you guys go into this class, you're pretty much coming with 15 years of ISO experience into this course. In between Dr. Casey and myself, Thomas, all of us work in the industry right now. Myself, more of consulting and diving in and doing workforce related programs, but it all ties back to quality management systems. If there's anything that you can take away from this is it's the power of Edward Deming, and you can see the brilliance of how he came into this organization and he really thrived. I worked under a guy, I can't remember his first name, but his name was Bill. And Bill was a facilitator for me years back. But I learned a lot about ISO quality management from him. And he actually worked under Dr. Deming in the early 90s prior to him passing. And so a lot of this stuff you guys see here is coming directly from um this time and this experience working with Edward Deming. And even though I wasn't, I was still like, I mean, I don't know, I think he died in like 94, right? I was
Well,
born in
the
88.
coolest thing about Deming, Zach, so I've done a lot of work with a guy named Tom Gilb, who's in some ways considered the grandfather of agile product development. He's the guy that came up with Evo and Planguage and so many different contributions. And he's told me all these stories because he used to be Dr. Deming's personal aide. So he had to drive him around London. And he said every Friday night he got to go to the opera in London with D. Edward Deming. Just
Yeah.
can you imagine? And also, can you imagine being in the opera, and you have the ultimate quality management expert up there watching you play? That's got to be nerve-wracking, right?
Yeah. And I mean, you think about the greats, Ford, Deming, um, Franklin or Frederick Taylor. I've heard that he was kind of an asshole. Like I've read a lot of books about him because he had focused so much on standardization and
Well,
ease of work. And
what he did was the reason, well, aside from being like a huge racist against Dutch people of all people, right? That was in his book. He talks about this guy named Schmidt and how dumb he
yep,
is because he's Dutch, right? And you're thinking like, if you're going to be racist, the Dutch, right? But anyway, the other thing is at home, he didn't know where work ended, and so he did all this time motion stuff at work, and he followed people around with a stopwatch. Well, he did it at home, and you can imagine if your partner's walking around with a stopwatch, like asking you when the chili is going to be ready, that might not be the recipe for a successful marriage, right? So,
yeah. And the power of these individuals and like it's kind of crazy how they've I remember hearing when I started my undergrad, right? My undergrad, just so you guys know, is in industrial engineering technology, and so I would go through and study these things. And my background is pretty much Lean Six Sigma if you look at it, and that's what I've built my career off of. And you know one of the things that I think is powerful is, yeah, you can have the standards, you can have the organization, but you guys as internal auditors, you're going to be guiding these teams. You have to be people. Frederick Taylor, I don't, a brilliant philosopher. You got to think we didn't have Google, we didn't have anything. It was just best practices, right? And this is early 30s, 40s, 50s time frame, and we're starting to adopt a philosophy of quality management. 1970s come around, 1 out of 4 American-made automobiles in the late 70s had some type of quality defect in America. That's where you see like the Toyota production system really vamping up, and Toyota really dominates the warehouse. Well, where did Toyota get that from? Well, they adopted Ford's methodology for what's the word I'm trying to think? Mass production. You guys leading teams, remember, you can read the standards, you can show them in the book what it's supposed to be, but a lot of this is developing feedback channels for quality management. There's things that are on that front line that people see and they may not know be an issue, right? You think an average frontline worker, their education level is what? Maybe a 10th grade level, maybe if that, right? So that's the way you have to approach that. Keep things simple. And that's where Frederick Taylor really shined, is he really showed about standardization and workplace practices and keeping things simple to create a better flow, right?
and I think simplicity is probably the part that we get hung up on, right? With quality management, with lean, because we think simplicity and we think immediately of simplicity in design, but that's not what we're talking about, right? We don't want a product that has minimal features. Instead, what we want is simplicity of use. And we want it to be so simple to use that it looks like it was easy to design. And that's exactly what the PDCA is, right? It's so simple to talk about and so easy to say, oh, look, it's a scientific method. But somebody had to sit down and figure out, how am I going to rebuild a country's economy that has been nuked and lost all of their standing in the world, right? And they're an island nation that has very few natural resources. How are they going to survive? And Japan didn't just survive, it became the model for quality.
Yeah, I would say that. Well, I teach a lot of those of you guys know me, that I came from a quality engineer background and then went into education, then working with industries, various different exposure. But as a quality engineer and quality manager, a lot of it is that people-based component and guiding and leading teams and showing them, because it sounds simple, right? You're like, okay, it's pretty straightforward. Like, hey, you got to have this, got to do PDCA, got to look at quality management systems and what kind of feedback loops we have. All right, now take yourself into that frontline level where they may not know what the issues are because these people, they're more or less just trying to make a paycheck, right?
Sure,
And
and
so,
the
yeah,
biggest risk we see a lot of times in organizations is just that, Zach. It's that uh, it's not that there's a catastrophic failure or something horrible goes wrong. It's that there's death by a million paper cuts, by people cutting
oh,
corners,
I
or
like
people
that.
trying to, and that's how it happens, and it happens incrementally and insidiously, and that's why organizations rot from the inside out. without quality management, they aren't tracking what's going on. They're not smelling the cheese, and so they wake up one day and the cheese is all gone or it's all rotten, and they don't know how they got there.
Yeah, you like how I put the cheese the cheese scenario
Says
in
that.
there? Yeah.
I didn't know if
This
that
is
was a
that.
Spencer Johnson allusion, like to Who Moved My Cheese or not, but I liked it.
Hey, Doc.
Yes, sir.
Which one?
Yeah, that's fair.
Every time I'm trying to register for the exam, it keep telling me no, something at the bottom.
Share your screen.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm
One
gonna go ahead. I'm gonna end the recording, but for you, before you go into this, Glaive, those of you that joined us tonight, I really appreciate it. Those of you that are going to be watching this online, this is a great program to be a part of. I appreciate it. We're gonna have you guys will get an email out tomorrow. I encourage you guys to share this because essentially you guys are facilitators. At the end of this book, students are going to register for ISO 9001. It'll come like you're essentially a branch of Star Global now. Once you register, now, whatever salaries that the industries pay you, hey man, I'm telling you, a couple $100 to make thousands of dollars. And I share that with you as a good opportunity for you guys to grow. So I'm going to close out this lecture. I'm going to upload it for you guys to see. And thank you guys so much for watching digitally online. And make sure you guys come back to Star Global for a lot of great information to share and grow and help land you guys' career in the industry. Thank you.